Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
All right, Glenn, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, I've discovered your work through a mutual friend, Scott Zimmerman, who I really had the pleasure of meeting a week ago through the same format. We got to explore some of his ideas, and it led me to you. So I'm excited to learn from you now.
Yeah, Scott's been a little bit of a hero because he has all the skills that I don't have. You know, he's a lighting guy. He's much more of a physicist than I am, and we're operating in a world where, in this particular instance, biology is interacting with physics and with interacting with people like Scott who are lighting engineers. And they're the key to, I think, major improvements in our environment.
Yes, he seems like a very important person doing really good work. I've actually got some of his bulbs on here while we're on the screen time, and that makes me feel a lot better about it. So,
Good, yeah. I don't have his bulbs on here, but I do have old incandescent bulbs on.
cool. Yeah, I'm scouring the internet now trying to buy as many as I can because of the banning and the regulatory process
Yeah.
that we're going to talk about. But yeah, he's such a pleasure to speak to, and what a kind, genuine human being. And it seems like you guys have a nice team of people that really do care about people and about health as the foundation. So I really
It
honor that.
Science works largely on the basis of people getting on with similar horizons. Um, it doesn't always work terribly well if you've got a genius amongst you who's not a team player. And at the moment, there's a good group of people, and I always think that you've got to get on to make it work, but also at the same time, you've got to get on to make it fun. And if it's not fun, it's just tedious. So at the moment, the team is very, very good, and I couldn't be happier.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes life a lot better. I know that from even being a fireman. All the guys I work with are really good people, and it makes life so much better. So,
Yeah, yeah.
well, cool. Let's explore. First of all, I'd like to get into talking about how you got into studying light and its effects on the biology and a little bit of the trajectory there, just so people who've never heard of you can understand a little bit of how you got so obsessed with this subject matter and why, because it's so important for people's health. So,
Yeah, if you take away vision and you take away plants, light and biology don't meet very well. And for me, it all started when I was asked to review a paper by a very, very good lab, and I read it, and I just thought, I don't understand a word of this. I don't know what's going on. Because I was probably, a little bit resistant to the idea about light and biology. Um, and I reviewed the paper, and I thought, this is opening a door I've never heard of before. And I went down the corridor to one of my colleagues who was a bit senior to me, and I said, "Do you know a story about light and biology?" And he went, "Nah, never heard of it." So that was, in some senses, a very interesting break because I had no preconceived notions. I had none whatsoever. And it was just reviewing a paper that opened the door. And then couple of conversations with people about this, that, and the other, and I suddenly realised there was this wide area, and within that wide area, there were a lot of low-hanging fruit. There are a lot of very big questions that people hadn't thought about. So, to try and exploit that, you've got to find a way of edging forward, finding people who can give you a hand, and they tend to be odd people that are positioned between intellectual silos who see different worlds. If you bring together just people that see your world, you're all going to think the same. And I think it was General Patton that said, if you're all thinking the same, someone's not thinking. And so the group is super good. The group is super good, and everyone's throwing things in that I was not expecting, and that makes it fun. It just makes it interesting.
hmm
So
how
that
long
that
ago?
Oh, I think this first started about, oh God, maybe 12, 12 years ago, 14 years ago. But for a long time, we wandered around in the wilderness. No one really paid much attention to what we were doing. Our stories got published, didn't get traction, didn't really get traction. Everybody kind of believed it but shrugged. I think now we've got traction. Now we've got traction in a way that's very exciting. We've got architects spending a lot of time with us saying, how do we design buildings to get good light in? We've now got started to get different forms of lighting into hospital environments. So people are paying attention. I think we there's a lots of things that we're not doing right in terms of lighting, in terms of public health, and it's not difficult to get it right. A cheap step can actually make a significant impact in public health. So I think that's where it kicked off. That's where the trajectory took off, and for a long time we didn't get really acceptance, but we've certainly got acceptance now. Um, I'm sitting in an old, part of an old hospital, an eye hospital, Moorfields Eye Hospital, and they're building a new one. I think they're up to about the fourth floor, and someone's saying to them, "Hey, well, this is a building in glass. You know, what are you doing about the lighting?" And the lighting is, I have to confess, that the lighting design is appalling. But we got the building halfway up, and people are saying, maybe we should start thinking about the lighting now. So the very fact that people are saying that, um, it means traction, and they don't have to say it to me. We can pass this one on to other people that can develop it. So yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's nice to hear how you got started and you began your neuroscience world. How long ago was that before you discovered lighting and all this stuff
Oh God,
15
no!
years ago?
I've been a card-carrying neuroscientist working in retina and visual brain since my PhD. And my doctorate was in the mid 80s that I completed my doctorate. And there was a kind of a long career doing stuff that I think you'd have to say was probably relatively mundane. It was solid. It was okay. There was nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't challenging anybody. It wasn't
Hmm.
really challenging anybody. And what we're doing now definitely challenges people. They've got to stop and think, drag them into a different position, and say, "Have you thought about it from this way?" Um, so yeah, prior to that, I was a regular neuroscientist. In fact, my background was really in experimental psychology, and then drifted into neuroscience. There isn't really too much of a barrier between them. Um, so from experimental psychology through to neuroscience, ending up in public health. It's quite a few steps.
Yeah, and it leads back to more inspirational work because now you've probably discovered just how much it affects your mental health, this light story. It's probably the most important story not told enough, which is why I'm happy to have you here because when I started to discover it, it was through initially I heard on Rick Rubin's podcast. He's an old producer of music, but he had Dr. Jack Kruse on, who's a neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
And he has this incredible ability to articulate the story of light that I'd never heard and its effects on our health. And immediately I had to listen to a 7-hour podcast of him. I re listened to it twice, and then I started to go down the thread and find other people who are speaking to this subject matter. But it's really more important not about all of the information and understanding the language as much as it is the behavior shift and the belief system shifts to then start to get out in the sun more in the morning and in the evening and just to be outside more. That's the ultimate message, is that we spent all of human history outside. And then all of a sudden, in a short period of time, a blink of existence, we're indoors with this inferior lighting and the effects on our health and on our nervous systems and all of that, which you've studied. And I'd love to get into some of the data you've come across, but it's incredible. It's probably more important than even food. So,
Um, people have argued that. Um, I think also, I mean, you bring in the issue of outdoors. For all these people making all these devices, making all these claims about what they can and cannot do to you in terms of metabolism and health, I always punctuate it by saying all they're trying to do is recapitulate what you can get from just walking in the park. I'm an absolute believer, and a lot of companies don't like me saying that. Um, but everything we do just reiterates that point. You get a device that gives one wavelength of health that's supposed to be really good, and it is really good. We've tested lots of them, but none of them are as good as actually walking out in sunlight, or
Hmm.
having a light source that recapitulates the whole spectrum of sunlight. You can do that. Um, so sunlight, yeah, the point has been much made. Millions of years of evolution in Africa under sunlight, and then we end up in the suburbs of cities in the far north, living in buildings, and we're being taken away from an evolutionary history that has set things like our metabolism and our immunity. Um, and well, the great thing is that people are now looking back and saying, "Hang on, this may be important." I think for many, many years, you think back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we continue to live in a very, very poor light environment, where it wasn't. We were increasingly emphasized moving into buildings and having poor lighting, and now we're turning around and saying the opposite. People are listening.
Yeah, and I heard you describe in a different conversation the life expectancy curve going up, up, up until about the early 2000s when it started to decline. And you correlated that with a lot of this light story as well. And thinking about how much exponential technological progress we've made with screen time and smartphones in our pockets from about 2009, 2010, that screen addiction has come in. And so the younger generation, there's this obesity epidemic and there's a mental health epidemic. And everyone's going, why is it there's so many factors? And one of the biggest factors is probably just the fact that they're not getting enough spectrum of natural sunlight and they're having all of that blue lit screen in their face, which is also creating this cycle of addiction and dopamine and the negative consequences. And then they're up at night and it ruins their circadian rhythm. So there's a whole correlating factor to it. And I'd love to hear your talk about that, the life expectancy.
Yeah, I think we have to be very, very careful. So it is definitely the case that within the Western world, and particularly, say, in Western Europe, life expectancy increased, 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 and it gently went up. In Western Europe, generally, we're about 82 years now, our life expectancy. LEDs came in around, the early 2000s. And around the early 2000s, we find that there's a dent in that rate of increase of life expectancy. Now, we have to be super careful about this because there are lots of people that can walk in the room and say, yeah, it's because of A or B. It's not because of what you're saying. So we've got to be super careful because we cannot exclude all of those. But so we don't have a functional relationship, but we certainly have a correlation where you start to smell something's not quite right. And then you look at things like the increase in diabetes, the increase in um, body mass, and we can tie some of that into light. So we can reach into a few of those threads and say, yeah, look, this disease does appear to have a relationship with, a problem with light, and this disease can increase the rate of death. So the great experiment, which of course perhaps we won't do, is to change all the lighting and see if the dent in the curve changes. Does do we can you can't you're not going to live forever, whatever happens. But I think with healthcare, with appropriate lighting, we can push that beyond 82. Um, but we have to be careful about not making outrageous claims for it. We can make claims that say light is associated with age-related diseases which increase mortality. That is without doubt. But stepping back
Hmm.
to that massive picture, saying it's all to do with light, I'm not quite. I personally believe it, but I don't run around shouting about it without the qualifications.
Yeah, well, that's probably a smart idea if you want to be taken seriously.
Yeah,
And I'd love to hear your description of mitochondria. And I've heard you talk about how much is packed in the retina, and just looking at mitochondria for the effects of longevity and health, and your studies that you've done on mice and things of that sort, and what the
yeah.
effects are.
Mitochondria have suddenly become very popular, and they should do. They should be. They produce this energy called ATP, and you make your own body weight in that every day. So if you're making your own body weight in something, it's got to play a role. It's got to be important. Mitochondria play a role in the vast majority of diseases, either directly or indirectly. So some diseases, such as Parkinson's disease, kick off primarily as a mitochondrial disease, where mitochondria, because they can generate cell death, um, mitochondria kick off cell death in a very, very small part of your brainstem, and everything goes downhill from there. Um, if you have other diseases that aren't necessarily mitochondrial, the response of the mitochondria very often is to nosedive as a consequence. So you may have another disease which is causing certain symptoms, but if the mitochondria decline and the energy they generate declines, you have a problem. So one of the issues, why do we get fevers? Well, if we get fevers, one of the things is our body temperature goes up. Our body temperature goes up. Actually, that increases our mitochondrial efficiency, and they start to make more of this ATP, this energy. So there's a highly complex relationship between disease and mitochondria. There is no strong relationship between life expectancy, disease, and your kneecap, right? So we should pay attention to mitochondria. They do regulate life expectancy. They do regulate your health span. And the great thing about them is they look out at the world and they respond to light. Um, we thought that that only mitochondria very, very close to the skin surface um, respond to light, but that isn't true. We this summer we lined people up outside our building, and we measured sunlight passing through their bodies. Now, only the longest wavelengths of light that we can't see with our eyes, the infrared, they're the only ones that pass through your body, and not a lot come out the other side. Most of them are absorbed in the body. But those are the wavelengths that mitochondria respond to very positively. That as a mitochondria is starting to decline, normally with age, but also with age and disease, we can improve its efficiency with long wavelength light, which is going into our body. Um, and that's been done time after time after time. And it's been done with flies, it's been done with worms, it's been done with mice, it's been done with humans. It is, we say it's highly conserved across species. So while there are differences in mitochondria between flies and humans, they're not that big. So
Mm.
that we can play the same games with them with light. Old flies, we can give them red light and we can get them to move better. They crawl up tubes better. They fly better. We give them blue light and they slow down. Those blue wavelengths discharge the mitochondria and they reduce the amount of energy that the mitochondria make. So blue and red, both part of the solar spectrum in a balance that has been there for billions of years. Solar light hasn't changed throughout the evolution of life on the planet. Has had this balance between blue and red. And now I'm shifting you into a building. You're not getting much sunlight, and that balance between blue and red's gone. Everything's up for grabs now. The mitochondria are sitting there wondering what happened, and it's like the engine is now running very, very inefficiently because the balance has gone, the red has gone specifically. Um, and getting that balance back is one of the main aims that I see as being important for public health. We can either do it by dragging you outside, or if you're going to be inside, then we have to recreate a solar environment inside a building which has that balance between blue and red.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my office, my lab space, my kitchen at home has all got plenty of red in it.
And your way of getting red is the incandescent bulbs right now, or are you adding actual red lighting?
Okay, so this is a path that's moving so quickly, so
Mm-hmm.
quickly. So we took some ordinary LED lamps and we put into, which are white. They look white, but they've got a lot of blue in them, and they've got no red in them. And we've
Hmm.
stuck a red LED in them. You can't see, deep, deep red. Got a very significant improvement in people's vision, particularly as they age. And that was good. We just gave them the bulbs, told them to go away, and then measured them before and after. I like that. I like that experiment. It's not really an experiment. It's where you build a light into your lifestyle. So that was great. We were all super happy about that. And then one of my colleagues, Bob Fosbury, who by background is an astronomer and works on atmospheric light, and he said, well, you put in one wavelength in, it's not like sunlight. And of course, the old incandescent light bulbs that are now becoming a little bit difficult to get, the ones that were around when I was sort of relatively young, and they get hot when you touch them. And so they're regarded as energy efficient. We did the same experiment with incandescent light bulbs and got one of the best results I've ever got in my life.
Hmm.
Improvement in vision was, and that study is still partially ongoing, but we've replicated it time after time, and I feel confident now I'm going to stick my neck out.
Hmm.
I don't think we're going to convince governments to go back to incandescent light bulbs. And, in America, they're becoming illegal. In Europe, you can still get them, a bit difficult. But of course, the thing that you can do is you can get an incandescent light bulb, which is one of the light bulbs in your ovens, because LEDs will melt if you put them in the oven. So they've got to retain an incandescent light bulb in ovens. So there's got to be a compromise here. We got rid of incandescent light bulbs to save energy. When we threw those away, we threw something away that was valuable but not appreciated at the time. Now we appreciated it, but we've thrown it out in England. We have this statement, I don't know if you have it in America as well, was we threw the baby out with the bathwater. And we certainly did that. So where's our point of compromise? That's a really big issue. What is the point of compromise? Now, Scott Zimmerman has a point of compromise. So he makes these rather unique kind of light bulbs, or luminaires as we should call them, and they're LED lights with a little incandescent coil in them that gives off a lot of infrared light, and they don't get super hot. Is that the way forward? Well, I'm going to test his light bulbs for public health as soon as he ships them over. I think they're en route. I've got very little doubt about them. They're almost certainly going to work. But if I'm going to walk into the room and I'm going to challenge your assumptions, and I'm going to say to you, "Oh, this LED is really bad," I have to be able to offer you something. There's no point in walking in and being highly critical of someone or an idea unless you can displace that idea with a better idea, or displace that product with a better product. And so for that reason, I'm firmly behind what Scott's trying to do. I've managed to displace some of the lighting in critical care units, particularly where we've got people that are super sick. Um, and but so far we've been doing that with different kinds of LEDs. I'm hoping that the Scott compromise is going to be the way forward that people will take on board. Because the trouble is that those luminaires they're not cheap, because you've got two things in there. You've got coil and you've got the LEDs. But
Hmm.
if you mass produce something, you can get the price down. But the key point is I can't go around being critical of something unless I can offer you something better.
Yeah, and it would be
That's
nice
a,
to get the astronauts and the space programs on board, because I've heard you speak about their issues from just being surrounded by these LEDs and these terrible light environments, and how they become pre-diabetic pretty quickly. And so, if you could get the space programs involved, that would be huge leverage to then inspire people to create Scott's patents or whatever he's creating, and then scale it.
yeah, yes, I agree. Um, the trouble is, who do you talk to? So certainly one of my colleagues, Bob Fosbury, who's the astronomer who's worked with NASA, has raised the issue with them. I think there are some conflicts of interest there. The first conflict of interest is that a lot of NASA is run by the military. Military will share some information, but not all information. The other issue is that um, there is a push to get commercial companies to sponsor astronauts to go to Mars. So, and other places, long space flights. A commercial company is going to be reluctant to take on board long space flight journeys if there is a significant consequence for the human health of the astronauts. Um, NASA have noticed that these super fit people up
Mm-hmm.
on the space station are becoming pre-diabetic, that they're becoming they're aging faster. That's a real big one. So pre-diabetic, okay, get back down to earth, and we can probably sort your pre-diabetics out. Um, I'm not sure we're going to sort out the fact that you might have aged faster. I'm not sure you're going to get that time back. So commercial companies may have a reluctance about taking on board the burden of long space flight with those health issues up for grabs.
Mm.
Um, but you're absolutely right. And there are extreme environments. There are extreme environments such as the space station. There are extreme environments such as submarines. There are extreme environments in terms of um, ships, naval ships that have very low radar profiles, so they have no portholes. So people in those environments are likely to suffer from the light environment, and it's super, super, super cheap to resolve that. It's very, very cheap. When you've
Mm.
got an enclosed environment like that, to just go and get some handful of long wavelength LEDs and plug them in, and you will resolve a significant proportion of the problem, and the health of the individuals that you've got working in that environment will improve. Some of these people are absolutely critical. They're having to potentially make very critical decisions in the armed forces. We should make a big issue about making sure that metabolically they're in their best possible shape. If your metabolism declines, it's not going to do a lot for your thought processes and your decision making. Again,
Mm-hmm.
super easy to resolve. And I always point out to people, and I'm sorry if I keep saying it, if I'm wrong, I haven't cost you very much money, and I'm the one that looks like an idiot. Okay, but I don't think I'm going to be an idiot over this one because there's so much evidence. Just go and put long wavelength LEDs. You can't even see them. Just put them in,
Yeah.
and that'll be fine.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see for surgeons and people that are receiving surgery, both ends, the doctor and the patient in hospitals. Then you look at schools, and it seems like kids are probably the most vulnerable, and they're stuck in that bad lit environment as well. So it
Mm,
seems like there's so many environments where that would be so important, you
yeah,
know?
and easy to resolve. We know that the absence of red light is associated with myopia. Um, it's very much a sort of a sleeping disease because the child will develop myopia. We think we can correct it because we give them glasses. Um, and the problem isn't your problem today. Your problem is going to be in 40 years' time when you've got someone who, is middle-aged, they're very myopic, so the back of their retina is stretched and the retina tears. And you suddenly got someone with very, very significant visual loss. Um, but of course, that's another government's problem. It's not the problem of the government today. So you can always sweep that under the carpet. It's not our problem today. But maybe we can resolve it really, really simply, again, by just changing the lighting. We don't have to do something that's perfect. In this case, we can do something that will help significantly. And as someone has regularly said to me, we mustn't let the perfect get in the way of the good. Um, if we look at our old Victorian schools, what do we see? We see schools with massive windows, loads of light, certainly in the UK. What do we see in modern schools? We see relatively small windows, a lot of artificial light, and we had then they put, because they want to control the temperature in the building, it's infrared blocking glass. So one of the big issues, infrared blocking glass is almost as bad as the LED lighting. You're restricting the spectrum. LED lighting and infrared blocking glass, you're getting hit. You're getting hit twice. Really are. So if you
Yeah,
put up your hand up to your window on a warm day and your window's fairly cool, you've got infrared blocking glass.
yeah, and I just redid all my windows like a year and a half ago and paid what 15 grand or whatever it was, and now I'm like, God, I should have kept the old 50s windows because my house was built in 1947, and I thought, shit, I just made a big mistake because I might save a couple $100 on the electric bill, but now the plants are suffering from that, implication, and it would have been a lot smarter to keep the other glass at
Well,
least on one side of the building.
yeah, yeah. Well, again, you can correct it. You can correct it with maybe some long wavelength light LEDs. But the architects now are picking up on it. The architects are paying attention. Um, so I we, I spend a lot of time now with architects and lighting engineers, um, and it's funny the things you don't know. So I didn't know that if you've got 5 panes of infrared blocking glass and then you put a normal sheet of glass next to them, well, the first thing you notice is you can see that the glass all looks different, and architects don't like that.
Mm.
So it's like the light bulbs. We have to find a compromise between energy consumption and light. Maybe we need to think about, if we bring this energy into the building, finding a way of draining it and using it in some way or other. We need to be constructive, wild ideas, constructive ideas that are going to allow us to use energy efficiently, but in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, and the more this story gets told and shared, it's like throwing seeds out and seeing what happens, and more people will get a hold of it, and every unique person has their own ability to be creative and be inspired, and it will
Yeah.
manifest in ways we can't really wrap our head around. So it's nice to have the internet, and I'm talking to you from across the world, and then people are going to be hearing it from all over the place. So that's what I love about the internet.
Yes, I agree. Spreading the story across the world and talking to people is so important, and also talking to people who aren't in your intellectual domain. Um, so my youngest son is not a scientist by any means; he's a journalist, and I very often run ideas past him. And his first kind of comment is, "Why do you want to do that anyway?" Which is good because I'm going to justify it. But very often people walk into the room with different thought processes, and it's so important to listen to them, even though you may take it as a bit of an offence when they don't necessarily agree with you. Someone is going to walk through that door one day and see the problem in a very, very different way. Maybe someone who's autistic, maybe someone who just sees the world differently. Um, and they're the person that are probably going to solve that problem, not me. I came into this world of lighting and biology, and I instantly saw a whole load of things. But as you spend more time in a problem, you can run down a cul-de-sac, um, and get a bunch of difficult 15-year-olds in the room. One of them doesn't have the preconceived notions that you have. That's the sort of people that you really, really want to talk to.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I love it. The diversity of people and the exposure to different ways of perceptually
Mm.
grasping ideas. That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd love to hear some of your studies that you did. I remember you talking about hitting, I think it was mice with blue light and showing what happens to the respiratory rate. Maybe it was a cell. I forget what you were looking at, maybe even the mitochondria. But you were showing the pre diabetic stuff and some of the respiratory and heart rate stuff. I'd love to hear about some of these
Yeah,
studies you've done.
some of these are not mine.
Okay.
So there's a great study, which is, I don't understand why it's lost, and they cannulated people, and they exposed them very purely to some of the blue light in LEDs, 450 nanometers, And the moment they turned the lights on, their heart rate and their blood pressure changed. Woomph. Now, I don't want my heart rate and my blood pressure to change, unless I'm doing exercise. It's certainly the case that with mice, if you expose them to blue light, their retinal function, and again, this is blue light in the ranges that we're exposed to in our built environment, their retinal function declines. So ultimately, their vision should decline. And there's a great ex-student of mine, a research student who actually is in Kuwait, and I spoke to her this morning, and perhaps they've got less legislation there; they just do things quickly. And she's had mice sitting under blue LED lighting. To us, it looks white. What happens to them? They get fat. The blue light slows the mitochondria down. The mitochondria normally have to consume carbohydrates from our serum. If we slow them down, the carbohydrates in our blood don't get used, and you get fat. You not only become pre-diabetic, but you get fat. And these mice aren't very happy. So there's a lot of stuff out there coming at you from all different angles that's telling you that blue light around the 420s, the 450s, big in lighting in the built environment, is directly affecting metabolism. Now, the guys that published the paper on changes in human heart rate and blood pressure, they turned it into a positive story. Oh yeah, we can reduce your blood pressure. Well, yeah, okay, maybe that's right. However, I don't want a light to start interfering with my cardiovascular system. I don't want it to do anything abnormal. Lots of work on flies where you can have vast populations of animals. You expose them to the blue light and they slow down. They just slow down. They don't want to, a fly will always want to climb up a wall. Put a fly in a tube, it goes straight up a tube. It's a natural response they've got. They just don't really move up that tube very well. So,
Hmm.
and we can do the other thing with them. We can give them the red light and we can get them to go up the tube. But the blue light stories are all there, but they're in different packages in different places. So unless you publish all these studies and use the same keywords, you can't find them very easily and put them all together, read them, and get a consensus point of view about what exactly is going on. You have to sadly rely on someone like me whose profession it is to read those papers and me to synthesize them for other people. I'd much prefer it if they could do it themselves. You don't want to believe me. You want to believe all these studies and you see if you can put a story together. The story's there. The story's absolutely there and it is very solid. And the other thing about all this is if we forgot about the health issue, you walk into a room with harsh white LEDs and you're not happy. You don't feel comfortable. And as the architects always point out to me, is when you put up a building, what's the last thing you put into it? It's the lighting. And if you've overspent on any other part of that project, from the water pipes through to the wall partitions, at the end of the day, the only way you balance the books is by putting really cheap lighting in.
Hmm.
So we've got to be prepared to pay. We've got to be prepared to pay extra for public health and for our own health. So blue as a problem is there. Everybody knows it, or everybody in the game knows it, but the public are probably not quite so aware of it. And when
Mm-hmm.
we give blue or we give red, we change the messages that go around in our serum, in our blood, and the messaging is quite significant. So if I expose you to blue light or I expose you to red light, there is a change in very, very detectable signals in the blood. And those signals, maybe your arm is exposed to the blue light. Those signals run around your body, and your right big toe knows about it later on in the day. So the bad effect on one part of the body is transmitted across the rest of the body. Um, yeah, you've got a whole cascade of events that we need to interrupt. We
Yeah.
can interrupt it. It just takes a bit of thought and a bit of money.
Yeah, and it seems like people will end up cherry picking these ideas too and thinking that blue's bad. So now we need to have an industry popped up around blue blockers, and red is good. So people have these huge red lit thousands of dollar panels. And I've heard you speak to the idea that that's not necessary. Obviously, just get outside, or maybe it can be a little bit less invasive or intense. Like blue blockers are only blocking one part of the light, but maybe if you add the incandescent bulbs or the other light environment, the red environment, you don't need the blue blockers. Is that what it
Yeah,
is? Or
yeah. I think what you said is very sensible. Get yourself back to a balance of red and blue light. I'm not saying get rid of blue light at all. I'm saying that when it gets out of balance, when blue becomes dominant, as it does with LEDs, then you've got a problem. Then you have an issue. You can bring it all back together again if you can add the long wavelength light into the equation. And this people send me stuff. I've got some of these really big panels people have sent me. They're very expensive. Crikey, they're expensive. Um, I'm not sure you need very expensive devices, even if you want to give yourself red light artificially. Um, an LED is not an expensive thing. It's very, very cheap. If you put an LED in a box that makes it look good, that shouldn't be a very expensive event. Um, I don't know what we buy our our long wavelength LEDs for, but it's a few cents. It's a handful of cents, and it doesn't cost much to wire them up.
right,
Um, so yeah, I mean we don't test a whole range of devices, because if I did that, I wouldn't get on and I wouldn't do any science. Nor do we have any economic interest in any company that makes them. We did do some testing early on, um, uh, 2 or 3 years ago, and 4 or 5 years ago, because again, I had to say to people, if I'm going to tell you what you're doing is wrong, I've got to be able to tell you what is right and where you can go and get it. So we did test a few, and we said, these are good. These are okay. They do what they say they will do. A lot of the stuff that comes out of China is very poor quality. We have clinical trials, and for clinical trials, one is for a disease called retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative disease of the retina. Another one is for mitochondrial disease in kids, which is a devastating disease. Many of these kids don't make it beyond their 20s. Their heart fails because their mitochondria in the heart go. And so, we had to have something for these conditions. And the unfortunate thing was we bought a whole load of devices from Australia. They were great. They were really nice, simple little devices. You could clean them. Nothing sophisticated about them at all. And sadly, the person running the business, who was in his late 70s, I think, said, "That's it. I'm not interested in making money anymore. Here's all these torches. You can have them pretty much for nothing.
hmm,
I'm going to retire." That was really problematic, very problematic. There's another company now that makes glasses, which might be next best thing to do. But if you've got a clinical trial, you've got to have a device that is proven, that works, that is not going to get hot in your hand. It's not going to give you a shock. I'm dealing with devices you're putting up against your eye. Uh, it's kind of a risky area. So for that reason, we did make an investment in testing two devices. One of them is still in business, and we are using some of those devices in a clinical trial. To be honest with
hmm,
you, if I have to go back to ethics committees and get another device through the ethics committee for a clinical trial. It's one of the most soul destroying things. Sheets and sheets and sheets of paper that got to be filled in, and committee meetings and all the rest of it. And I'm awful at that. You know, I had to fill in my passport application form 3 times on one event because I just kind of a signature goes out of the box. I fill the wrong thing in the wrong place. Then I get angry and I get annoyed and I storm out and go and have a cup of coffee. I am just not personally suited for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Everyone knows at university college, don't give Glenn a form to fill in. He may be great at other things, but he can't fill forms in. So, and it just makes me unhappy.
Sure.
So there are problems with devices. Most of them are awful, but I can't spend my life testing them, I'm afraid.
Right. And now there's quite a, I guess it happens with things is where people are now just staring at these red light boxes and they don't maybe have the right context, right? They took it so narrowly focused and there's probably a lot of potential harm that could be caused by it. And then doing it at the wrong time of day. I've heard you speak about like when your mitochondria are most optimized would be in the morning. So there's a whole bunch of other variables that a lot of people might cherry pick, and then it could actually defeat the purpose or even cause a reversal of what you were trying to achieve.
Definitely, definitely. So um, as I say, I avoid the commercial sector. Um, there are some devices on the market for age-related macular degeneration that are unbelievably expensive, and people are using them, not being invited into environments where they pay a large sum of money to be exposed to the light that they generate. We know that these things don't work very well in the afternoon. And they're getting clinical appointments all throughout the day because that thing which is sitting on your bench, which is a money maker, you want to use it 24 hours a day if you can, because you're not earning any money by keeping it there without people. So yeah, you can only really get a strong effect with exposures really before lunchtime. A bit different between different people, but we've published that you really don't get very good effects in the afternoon. And it's the same in a fly and it's the same in a human. It's almost identical. Your mitochondria, they have lots of things to do in the world. They don't just make energy and drive healthy behavior or disease when they feel ill. They need to do their own kind of thing. We don't know what their own kind of thing is. So at different times of the day, they're doing different things. And I can shine a light at them and they're not interested. So time of day is an important issue. We think the good biological reason for that is that when you wake up early in the day, you've been vulnerable because an animal may have been keeping an eye on you and wants to eat you. So you've got to get up in the morning and you've got to be ready to go. Your mitochondria need to be in good condition. First thing in the morning, your blood sugars peak, which is ready to feed the mitochondria with a carbohydrate that it needs to produce ATP. All your hormones are in a completely different state in the morning compared with lunchtime. So that morning effect is very important. I'm quite happy. I know it only works effectively in the mornings, and I've got a fairly good idea consequently why. That's when you need your big kick of energy. We all know you don't get big kicks of energy at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're dousing coffee and all the other stuff that people are
Yeah.
taking, the
Yeah.
stimulants and
Yeah.
but I am seeing like lots of industry popping up, of course, around this red light therapy. And I'm now thinking that it would be smart if they start to just like you should, just always stay curious and keep learning, that you would inform your clients that are paying all this money to come to consider doing the red light therapy if they are doing it in the earlier part of the day.
Yeah.
And instead of coming after work, which is what they all do because they get off work and then they go to these clinics and they pay hundreds of dollars and they might be just wasting money when they could just go catch a sunset.
Yeah. Just to be honest with you, I'm a little bit more careful with my language than some of my colleagues, but I think I'm prepared to say you're probably throwing your money away with a lot of these things. Build it into your day. So we have lots of aged people who um, use red light, and we say to them, "Yeah, when you're making a cup of tea in the morning, that's the time to do it in the kitchen." Um, I I've either got a red light in the kitchen when I get up in the morning, or there's one in my office so that when I cycle in the morning, I get changed, get out my cycling gear. There's one in the background lighting there. It's been great with the kids, the young kids that have got mitochondrial disease. They don't have a lot of energy at the best of times, but they tend to keep their red light torches by the bed, and then they wake up in the morning and they put their torch against their eye, and they build a pattern of behavior. So if you want to do something regularly, you really need to build a pattern of behavior, particularly if you're a kid, or particularly if you're an older person and can't remember whether, did I do it at 9 o'clock this morning? Or did I do it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Patterns of behavior. Fit devices into people's patterns of behavior. Don't ask them to fit into the demands of your device.
Yeah. I always like to try to just get the most practical behavior shift that you can, whether it be internally, like a belief system shift, that's an easy one to absorb and to change, which is like get outside more often. That's very simple for people like my mom or people that I know as friends. They don't have to know all of the complexity of it. It's like just get outside more often if they
Yeah.
can. And then it's like something as simple as maybe slowing down a little bit. And when you're out there, just the slowing down part is probably good for you, because a lot of times we just get on the hamster wheel and we get moving. So if you go out for a walk, that's a nice shift.
Yeah.
But
Oh, completely agree. It maybe that exposure to daylight in the mornings, that walk to the bus station, that walk to the underground, maybe that's actually a really valuable moment in your day. And even if it's a cloudy day, that infrared light is bouncing through those clouds. You may not see it, you may not be aware of it, but you don't necessarily need direct sunlight. So, but of course, the issue is in the urban environment, most of us bounce out of bed, and then a mode of transport is not a mode of transport that is outside. We, go in enclosed buses, we go on the subway, um, so we don't get the pulse that perhaps we probably need.
yeah, and then they immediately look at the blue lit screen is usually the habit for most people now at this
Yeah,
point, which is a new phenomena. But I also heard Scott talking about, and maybe it was you as well, but how much you absorb through your clothing.
certainly the red light you do. Red light penetrates incredibly deeply. Blue light doesn't, and that's why you get sunburn. You get sunburn because those short wavelengths, those blue rays, are being stopped in the skin, and so they tend to burn the skin. The red rays are not stopped in the skin; they go through, so there's no kind of drop in energy. But if you and this is particularly important for us in terms of things like clinical care, where you've got someone in a bed, long wavelength lights pass straight through all those blankets, and there's minimum dilution of the light. Longer the wavelength, the more they penetrate through. And Bob Fosbury, one of our collaborators, he's got all these photographs of all his clothes out of the wardrobe, racked in a room with different light sources behind them. And it is quite surprising how much deep red light that we can't see goes straight through clothing. You know, maybe they're not going to go through clothing if you're wearing rubber. Maybe they're
Hmm.
not going to go through clothing. Maybe if you as a, I think you said you're a fireman. You've got very, very thick fire resistant clothing on. But if you've got an ordinary kind of t-shirt, shirt, jumper, and a pair of jeans, the red light is the long wavelength light that is clinically important, is going to go through it without hardly any reduction whatsoever. So
Awesome.
again, even on a cold morning, walking out there to your form of transport to work, um, even though you're wrapped up, those long wavelengths get into you. Yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's nice just to get like the practical things that people can do, which I heard also just sitting in the shade while you're outside is very beneficial because you're still absorbing all of that
yeah,
good light. So, and
yeah.
then what about sunglasses? It's something that I started to remove as much as possible now, if I can. Is that something because the eyes are taking so much of the light in, and when you block them, is that what are your thoughts around sunglasses?
Sunglasses. I think the first thought about sunglasses is comfort. right? I'm very, very slightly photophobic. So I tend to hunker into the shade very slightly rather than sit in strong sunlight. Sitting in sunlight is not a problem. People in Africa, right, have light streaming into their eyes, and they're not all going blind, right? So sunlight per se is not necessarily dangerous. Wearing sunglasses, I think, is a matter of comfort, visual comfort, which is very important in our lives. Um, you're getting, even if you wear sunglasses and you block a proportion of that light, you still got that long wavelength light coming through your skin, going through your clothes. So it doesn't really matter too much.
Mm.
I wouldn't worry about it. The one thing we haven't touched on here, but you've alluded to slightly about, sitting in the shade, which is absolutely fine. You're getting loads of infrared in the shade, is the importance of plants in our environment. Um, and this is very much Bob Fosbury's work rather than my own, um, in that these all plants reflect infrared light. And that's because when you touch them in strong sunlight, they're not hot, they're cool. They're cool because they're getting rid of all this heat inducing infrared light. So that means when you sit in the park, um, the grass underneath you is reflecting all this infrared. The trees are reflecting all this infrared. So sitting in the park is potentially a very positive thing to do. And that's impacting on architectural practice to some extent now, because people are saying, well, if we've got a building which has got a north and a south facing aspect, what happens if we plant loads of trees behind the building on the north facing side? Now, what that will mean is that the plants which are sourcing solar light further from above will reflect that solar infrared light into the building. So
Mm.
plant matter and where we put plant matter could be very important in how we design our buildings. So compromise, all the things about applications of technology tend to have that word involved in them. Compromise, we block maybe a lot of the sunlight on the south facing aspect of the building so that we keep the thermal engineering happy. It doesn't get too hot inside. But
Fascinating.
maybe windows on our north side don't have infrared blocking light in them, but they've got, a row of trees, something that will reflect the infrared light on the cool side of the building into it. And
Mm.
and you find most people, if you put them in a building with trees, whether it's on the north side or the south side, they're happier. They quite like
Right.
looking at trees. I mean, I love looking at trees. The idea of working in some environments looking out over concrete, it's just not really very nice. And then if
Yeah.
we can build that into your health systems, that's great. That's
Yeah.
absolutely great. Let's think about that for our schools and our hospitals. Plant
Yeah.
matter to improve our enjoyment of the environment and also to increase the infrared light that we can get on a cool side of the building.
Yeah, and the air quality would be better too, I'd imagine. And if you look at places like, I think it's Sacramento, where they have certain building code where they've planted the most amount of trees than most cities because each building has to have a certain amount of trees planted. That would be nice to start implementing into other cities.
Yeah,
Cools the city down, keeps things more shaded. It makes it more pleasant to walk outside.
yeah. I've forgotten the city that piloted that in the States, but I was a little bit surprised when I saw where it was, because it wasn't a particularly, can one say, it wasn't a necessarily forward, you would associate with a forward thinking, dynamic public policy. It was somewhere I think in the Midwest, um, and they were spot on. And I saw that, and I saw some of the pictures of it, and I thought that is absolutely great. It looks good, and it's absolutely great for public health. And it was somewhere where you wouldn't expect it. But that's
Yeah.
like inviting a kid into a room and asking them their opinion. Someone's going to give you an opinion from a different angle, and you're going to benefit from that argument. So
Yeah.
someone in that city that we may not regard as perhaps the most dynamic had a smart idea, implemented that idea, and brought a concept forward.
Yes. Very nice. Well, what else would you like to share about what you're working on or what you've come across that you think would be important for people that have just discovered this subject matter? Is there
Well,
anything that's on the tip of your tongue there?
well, if I were if I were an organic chemist dealing with difficult concepts, that question would be impossible to answer. But I'm not. I'm a relatively ordinary, straightforward scientist, and what I'm putting forward is really, to be frank, it's incredibly obvious. I got this one past my mother in a few minutes. My mother is not the sharpest person on the planet, but she's certainly probably the most difficult individual on the planet. So if I can get this, everything I've said to you, I can say to a classroom of 10-year-old kids, and they get it. And I think the people that are going to listen to your podcast, I don't think I have to say too much more to them. I have to
Hmm.
tell them to think about changing your LED lighting. I would love them to spend more time outside. People that spend more time outside have lower rates of a whole range of diseases, including cancers, much lower rate of diabetes. Their health spans improve. Now, that's not a complicated thing to tell people to do. It's a really simple thing to do. You know, walk to the shops, spend more time outside. If you're going to spend time inside, think about your lighting. And again, I'm not telling you anything that's complicated. I'm telling you old style light bulbs, can't get them, get some LEDs, buy a device that actually gives off infrared light. Um, I wish I could pretend that it was a lot more complicated than that,
Yeah.
but it isn't.
Sometimes, yeah, the simple stuff sometimes is right in front of us. It's like I'm thinking of two subjects. One is processed food, eating food out of boxes and the food pyramid and all of that we were fed. It was so in our face for so long, and we had an obesity crisis. But now people go, oh, we're going paleo. Everyone's going back to the simple basics, eating whole
Yeah.
foods. And it's something also, another one is breath work, like learning to pay attention to the fact that you're breathing and learning to use your breath to slow it down for the nervous system and the regulation and your emotions and just to feel better. It's so simple, but it's a huge shift in your health.
Oh God.
So there's so many things that you don't have to get super complex, which you can have gone down the breathwork rabbit hole, and it's so deep, and there's people studying it for years. But the simple behavior techniques are very practical and easy.
Yeah, I'll share something with you about my inadequacy. I for years, Tuesday nights were nights where I did an hour's yoga class, and that yoga class was a lot about breathing, a lot about thinking, a lot about holding positions. Tuesday nights, I slept so well. Wednesdays always went better than most other days. It was an obvious thing to do. Why did I stop? I stopped because something in life seemed to get in the way, like picking up the kids from school. Like something got in the way. And yet I sit and look at myself and I think, why the hell don't you go back and you just spend more time in a certain position thinking about your breathing, paying attention to it. I'm not a tree hugging vegan. It's just so obvious. Why don't I do it? I don't do it because life gets in the way very often. But I don't eat highly processed food. I do cycle backwards and forwards to work, and I do make sure that I get some light. So maybe the next thing on the horizon is finding those Tuesday early evening yoga sessions, because
Yep.
it's so obvious that things get better.
Yeah, and you don't have to be the woo-woo super, like you said, hippie person to do yoga or to go outside barefoot and to walk or to do breath work or, there's a
Yeah,
lot of simple shifts that we all as human beings, you just think of the fundamentals and it's very practical.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. Just one way or another, just chill. I certainly do. I certainly do find a period a few times of the week where I try and close everything down and concentrate on the breath. But to be honest with you, it's nowhere near as good as going through that. I mean, this was yoga for low performers, I must tell you. I wasn't putting my ankle around the back of my head or anything like that. But I think it's about an ability to pause, and concentrate on some of the things that go on inside you. Yeah, I've got to do more of that before I die.
I agree. I think we all could benefit from that. And
Yeah,
I recently have gotten a little bit down the interest in studying and understanding more about water and the effects that light has on water with Gerald Pollack's work, The Fourth Phase
yeah,
of Water. I just had him on the podcast, and now I'm really fascinated with just the subject of light. And if our whole body is water and the whole planet is water, it seems to make sense, and the whole world wouldn't work without obviously our giant sun. These fundamentals are so right in our face, but it makes so much sense. It's like this is the stuff we should focus on and really understand, and bring
mm.
back into our daily lives.
And water is a major absorber of red light. That's why the
Yeah.
seas are blue. A major absorber, and yeah, you turn another corner and you think, hey, this is another whole world I just don't have time for, but I should do. So, a good argument for retirement.
That's awesome. Well, I have one question I love to ask everyone, and it's if you were going to die today, what would you want to share with the world?
I didn't know you were going to ask me that question. What would I want to share?
Surprise.
What would I want to share with the world? I think I'd like to share with the world the fact that I personally have found a considerable degree of contentment from my science, particularly when my science went from being internal, which is I want to find that out because I get a buzz from that, to when my science became external, which is when I started to say, I want to tell people about things because I think it might be good for them. And part of that is this podcast. I have felt when you do science that's internal, you get quite tense and you're running around. What was the answer? What was the answer to this? What was the answer to that? I think it's only when you sit back and you try and externalize your science and tell people about it that there's a real. I certainly find there's a good feeling about it. If someone goes away and does one thing that makes them just improves their life one little bit, that's great. And I do feel maybe it's a bit egocentric, but I do feel a hell of a lot better for that.
It's beautiful. It means that you're of service and you're sharing what you've discovered, which is the most important part. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
If,
Well, I've had a really nice time chatting with you. You're really fun to talk to, and it's been great to learn from you today.
well, I've appreciated it because you've helped me on this journey to get that conversation out. And I say this, and it kills me time after time. But if people had issues, I'm easy to find, and I always try. I always try and respond, even if it takes me a few days, because I think that's one of the things that people in my area of science should be doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today.
It really has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.